Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Prakrit, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about the ecology of scorpions in the Diablo Range. So the Diablo Range is actually a fantastic place to look for scorpions, and there's very little information available out there. So I hope to fill that gap and talk a little bit about how interesting these species are. But first, to get started, I want to talk about how important Save Mount Diablo and the Diablo Range has been to my introduction to scorpions. So, like many people growing up in the Bay Area, I thought about scorpions as something that lives in the deserts and something that maybe is not as easily found so close to home. But at a BioBlitz by Save Mount Diablo in 2014, when I was about 10 years old, I saw this scorpion right here, which was found by Kenichi, who's in the audience today. And that was my first introduction to Bay Area scorpions, and it's really what got me excited. A few years later, I continued to look for scorpions in the Bay Area to try to learn more and more about them. And I started trying to do photography on my own. I'd like to think my photography has come a long way since here, but a lot of these early experiences in the Diablo Range were really instrumental to me getting started in working on these species. So now I'll start to talk about the scorpions of the Diablo Range. Now, as I mentioned, there's very little information about them out there, so I've tried to compile information on each of these species in sort of a field guide kind of format. So please feel free to take pictures of the slides, and I hope this information can be helpful for people who are interested in the biodiversity of the Diablo Range to learn more about our native scorpions. So here are the 10 scorpion species that have been confirmed from the Diablo Range thus far. They encompass several different families and a great range from very large species to very small species. This is actually an unusual amount of diversity, especially for an area with this kind of habitat, an area that's relatively far north compared to where the bulk of scorpion diversity is in North America. In fact, this is more scorpion biodiversity than is found in 44 US states. So this is really quite a remarkable area for these animals. So first, I'll start talking about the western forest scorpion. This is a species that many of you are likely familiar with. It's one of the most commonly encountered scorpion species in the Diablo Range. And this is a species that can most often be found in habitats such as this. It lives in forests and woodlands. Many of you might have seen this species in places like Mount Diablo or places like Mount Hamilton where these pictures were taken. And it can be seen in these parts of the Diablo Range. And for a note on these maps, over here on the right, I have made a model of the distribution of this scorpion based on parameters of climate, soil, the topography of the land, and so on. So it kind of depicts what theoretically might be suitable for this species. And then over here on the left, I have a model of a map that I drew by hand based on records from iNaturalist, based on my own surveys, and based on museum records that suggest what the more accurate range of the species might actually be. But for a lot of species, the range of the species is actually not very well known, especially in the interior parts of the Diablo Range. So that's a big step that needs to be filled by more scientific surveying, and it'll really help us learn more about and conserve these animals. Next up, we have the sawfinger scorpion. This is another species that many people might have seen. This is a smaller scorpion and can be identified by its long, thin, and curved fingers. This species is really restricted to rocky habitats in the Diablo Range. It really likes outcrops of rock like what is shown over there, or even talus like what is shown over here. And this is a species that is found essentially throughout the Diablo Range, and all of the Diablo Range is really high quality habitat for this species. Although strangely, it doesn't seem to be found in the Santa Cruz Mountains or East Bay Hills, even though the habitat seems theoretically suitable. Next up, we have the California common scorpion, or Paruroctonus sylvestri. This is a species that is also fairly common in a lot of the Diablo Range, but especially in the northern portions, and can be identified by its relatively dark coloration and the marbling on the carapace. And I actually have some examples of it if people would like to take a look. I can pass them around. Yeah, so this is a species that in the Diablo Range is generally found in open habitats. It really likes sagebrush scrub. It also really likes these kind of open, more grassland type habitats in the northern parts of the Diablo Range, and it can achieve really high density. In places like Altamont Pass, you can see dozens of them even without using a UV light, just by walking around at night. And this is the distribution of this species in the Diablo Range, and I'll talk more about the distribution of this species and why it's a little bit more unusual with disjunct populations a little bit later in the presentation. Next up, we have this species, the Monterey woodland scorpion. This species doesn't actually have a common name, but I thought this was fitting. And this is a smaller species, although it looks superficially similar to the western forest scorpion. It has a more uniform color, and it has proportionally larger claws. It also has a little bit different habitat preferences. So this one lives more in woodland type habitats, but really can be found pretty much wherever it can find moisture. So even further south in the Diablo Range in desert type of habitats, you can find it as long as you can find these little dry creek corridors where there's a little bit of moisture. And you can see a little bit of its range over here. This is one of my favorite scorpions in the Diablo Range, and it's one of the first ones I learned how to identify in the Bay Area. But I would really suggest if you want to try to look for it in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It's much easier to find. This species right here is very interesting and very personally important to me. This is a devil scorpion in the genus Paravegivis, but it's currently unassigned to any species, and it most likely represents an undescribed species. And this was actually something that I found out about in 2019 while doing surveys near Panoche. And this is the first time I found an undescribed species of scorpion, and this is what really got me interested in working on the taxonomy of scorpions, and that's something that I've continued to this day. This species I have not yet described so far because it seems to have opened a taxonomic can of worms. This genus needs a huge revision, but it's something that I'm excited to work on in the future. This species can be found in desert-type habitats like what are shown over here, and it is most often found in the southern parts of the Diablo Range, although along the eastern margin it can be found all the way up to the Antioch area. Next up, we have another woodland scorpion, similar to the Monterey woodland scorpion, but this one is Gramlois evi. And this is one I've recently begun working on and found out that it's much more interesting than I had previously considered, because this actually potentially represents a complex of 5 or more species across California. An example of one from the East Bay Diablo Range region is over there on the right, but one from the Sierra Nevada is seen over here closer to me, and you can see the shape and size of the claws is pretty different between the two populations, and they're almost certainly different species. This one lives in woodland-type habitats and is really restricted to moist areas, and things like creek corridors can be good habitat for it. And in the Diablo Range, it's one of the most range-restricted species. It's only really found on Mount Diablo and adjacent parts of the East Bay Hills. Other populations in California are found further up the coast ranges, up into the Klamath Mountains, towards the Oregon border, and in the northern Sierra Nevada, but they almost certainly represent different species to the ones in this area. So this might be an endemic scorpion to the Bay Area, which would be really cool. Next up, we have the California swollen stinger scorpion. This is a very shiny species. It's a relatively large species, and it can be very easily identified by not only its shiny appearance, but also the swelling on the stinger in males. Hopefully that is visible right there. And this species is ecologically quite different from a lot of other California scorpions because it's an obligate burrower. And you can most often see it in its burrows with its claws sticking out of the hole, especially if you look at night with UV light. It often lives in chaparral-type habitats, like what is shown here, although sometimes it can be found in woodland as well. Pinnacles is really the only good place I've found to look for it in the Diablo Range area, but it is relatively broadly distributed in the southern part of the Diablo Range. And next up, we have the superstition mountain scorpion, this one right here. This one is my favorite species of scorpion in California. I think it's very unique and very interesting. It's part of a monotypic family, the only known monotypic family of scorpions globally. And it is very small, has a very unique pattern, and is also a habitat generalist. But in no habitat in the Diablo Range is it particularly common, except for one, which my surveys have found out recently. So typically this species is thought to be found in more desert or chaparral-type habitats, but throughout most chaparral in the Diablo Range it is absent, and in the Diablo Range the only place that surveys have shown that it is common is in this high elevation incense cedar habitat up on San Benito Mountain. And I have some more examples of this species as well. And this, yes, you can see the distribution of this species in the Diablo Range. And this is particularly interesting because this species, the model of the habitat suggests that it should be present in the Mount Hamilton Range. And it actually doesn't show these southern parts as being all that suitable, which potentially suggests why they're not very common in that area. So additional surveys might actually expand its range further to the north. Another thing about this species, like some of the other species I've talked about, is that this might represent a species complex, which might help to understand why we don't fully comprehend its range right now. And next up, we have the dark hairy scorpion. This is by far the largest species of scorpion in the Diablo Range. And the species is also one of the more range-restricted species in the Diablo Range. Really, this is a San Joaquin desert scorpion, but it barely ranges into the Diablo Range in the Panoche area and in the Coalinga area. It really can only live in these very open habitats, and especially it likes the flatter open habitats more than the steeper open habitats in my experience. And here's an example of its range within the Diablo range. And I have an example of this one as well. Now, with that out of the way, I'm going to get to Paruroctonus variabilis, which is the species that I have been studying for the Mary Borman grant, and one of the most interesting species in the Diablo range. This species can be very variable, as its name suggests. It can come in this light form like this. It can have a dark form such as this one and a more orangey form like this one. And it can be found in quite a few different habitats throughout the Diablo range. I do have some examples, of course, of this species as well. And to talk about its habitat a little bit more, so the habitat of Paruroctonus variabilis can be very variable, again, as the name suggests, throughout the Diablo range. The most typical habitat for the species and the most abundant habitat is typically habitats such as this. It's kind of a desert type of habitat, steep slopes with a lot of fine soil and rocky habitat. They really enjoy burrowing in fine soil, although they're not obligate burrowers like the Paruroctonus. This is a species that's almost always found in association with burrows, especially in this kind of habitat. It can be also found in areas such as this. These really steep soil cuts are great habitat for this species. But it can also be found in more atypical habitat. This is kind of like a more flat and rolling hills type habitat where they can also be found, but in small populations. They can also be found in the incense cedar habitat up on top of San Benito Mountain, which is really unusual habitat for them. It's really the only forested habitat that they can be found in. They're found in more chaparral types habitats lower down on San Benito Mountain. And they can be especially found in chamise chaparral type habitats further north in the Diablo Range. So almost all of the disjunct populations of this species further north are associated with chamise and other similar chaparral plants. And lastly, in the San Joaquin Desert, the species can be found in completely flat habitats such as this, although my preliminary work is suggesting that these are probably a separate species. Now, the range of this scorpion can be seen here, and as you can see, the entirety of the Diablo Range does have a theoretically suitable climate for this species, but it is absent from much of the northern Diablo Range. And my hypothesis is that this comes down to competition with Paruroctonus sylvestri, which is a closely related and morphologically relatively similar scorpion species. So this Paruroctonus variabilis is pretty varied across this range, as I was mentioning, and you can especially notice that lighter phenotypes are found here down near the south, and darker phenotypes are found up here near the north. And these darker phenotypes that are found in core Paruroctonus sylvestri habitat are morphologically more similar to Paruroctonus sylvestri than these lighter phenotypes, which once again suggests to me that there is some kind of ecological factor which is suggesting that Paruroctonus sylvestri is a better adapted scorpion to these northern areas over here. This is the distribution of the two species overlaid upon one another, and this now makes the distributions make quite a bit more sense. You have Paruroctonus sylvestri up here further towards the northwest, and Paruroctonus variabilis down here towards the southeast. So this kind of shows like a more desert versus like a more temperate and chaparral kind of habitat split. And these species mostly have an allopatric distribution. The distribution is parapatric in some areas, which can be highlighted in orange here. And most interestingly, they do have certain sympatric populations, which are shown here in red. These I find particularly interesting, and I'm going to zoom in on a couple of them right now, because they follow two completely different trends. So this sympatric population right here is found in the central part of the Mount Hamilton range, where Paruroctonus variabilis is almost completely associated with small patches of chamise chaparral, while Paruroctonus sylvestri is broadly distributed. It's found in lowlands over here in a more desert kind of habitat. It's found in sagebrush chaparral over here, and it's found pretty much just everywhere. This population right here at Mission Peak is also very strange. Paruroctonus variabilis seems to be restricted to only a couple hundred meters along a particular sandstone outcrop. This habitat is the complete opposite. This is down south near Panoche, and now instead of Paruroctonus sylvestri being widespread, Paruroctonus variabilis is widespread, again found in lowland desert type habitats, in sagebrush chaparral type habitats, in chamise chaparral habitats, in just basically wherever it can live. And Paruroctonus sylvestri is now the one that's restricted to a very small area, right up here near the top of San Benito Mountain. So currently, I have no idea what's going on here, and I would love to hear anyone's input on why these species have such a bizarre habitat preference. Now, finally, to wrap up, I'll talk about the next research steps in Paruroctonus variabilis and what I'm working on with this grant. So I've been especially looking at these different population segments of Paruroctonus variabilis. The colors here point to different genetic clusters within the species that potentially might be species-level splits. But their ranges seem to overlap, and I think that additional genetic work with with next generation sequencing is needed to really resolve the details of this, and this is what I've been working on with the Mary Barman grant. But in addition to that, looking at the variation across different localities and competition with Paruroctonus sylvestri, or potentially even gene flow with Paruroctonus sylvestri, is something I'm very interested in the future. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for listening. I would especially like to thank the individuals here on the screen who have helped me with many aspects of this project. And I'd like to open this up to questions. And this is a Paruroctonus variabilis cannibalizing a small Paruroctonus variabilis near Panoche.
That was a very interesting talk. Can you help us a little by relating the anatomy that you're distinguishing these by for their survival in their environments?
Yeah, so a lot of the details of scorpion anatomy are pretty closely linked to either substrate or to diet. So one thing in particular here, you can see the size of the claws. The size of the claws for most species is related to the musculature of the claws. And species that rely more on their claws, just burrowing species, since they can't get their tail out of their burrow to sting their prey, they typically have broader and stronger claws versus species that hunt more out in the open and more use their venom to subdue prey. Another thing you can look at is the legs. So the legs of the scorpion are more robust in burrowing species, of course, because they use them to burrow. But also the hairs on the legs are another key factor. Species that burrow in sand actually have long, thin legs, unlike those that burrow in clay. And they use the hairs on their legs to help them burrow, while those in clay soil end up having clay get stuck on their legs, so they don't have many hairs on their legs, and they instead use strong, robust legs to burrow. So those are some of the features that relate to the ecology.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you find these, notably using the black lighting and the flipping? I understand the black light, but I don't understand the flipping.
So the flipping is just turning over surface objects such as logs and rocks, and the scorpions can oftentimes be found underneath. Some species of scorpion, that are more living underground, such as the woodland scorpions, can be difficult to find by blacklight because they're not always active on the surface. So I find a more reliable way to find some of those species by turning over surface objects.
Quick question. Some of those scorpions are alive in the containers, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Please don't.
Good question. Yeah, 1, 2.
You've done a tremendous amount of work finding this massive distribution, unless you've got a lot of help. So can you reflect on numbers of individuals that are out there?
I see. So scorpions in the Diablo Range can sometimes reach very high densities in some of these locations. Species, especially like the sawfinger scorpion, you can have certain areas where you can look around with a black light and have around 30 individuals in front of you. Other species are much more difficult to find. In all my surveys in the Diablo Range, I've seen the dark hairy scorpion only once within the Diablo Range, although it's a little bit more common further south. But I think right now there's a lot of work to be done on the actual population density of the scorpions. Really only one set of studies has been done in California on dune scorpions in Southern California that looks more at population density kind of questions. So I think that's one place where there's a lot of work left to do, and I think it has important implications for things like conservation of these scorpions.
Thank you, Prakrit. Yeah, if any of you have more questions for him, which I'm sure you do, let's wait till lunchtime, but thank you for that. That was excellent. Thank you.